Warframe Wednesdays, we're going to talk a little bit about an old friend, the one they call Archwing. That's right, it's that time again. Roll the clocks back. About 120 hours ago, personal playtime for me, I made a video asking you guys as a whole, the community, why you didn't really seem to care for Archwing. Why Archwing had kind of been just pushed aside, there really wasn't much community interaction with it, people just didn't seem to care for it anymore. The general consensus was this: Tony, we actually kind of like the idea of Archwing. In fact, for some of us, it's sort of a Gundam-esque fantasy that's really badass. However, its overall implementation isn't that great, and it doesn't really blend well into the base Warframe experience. There's just not a lot of reason to actually play Archwing unless it's forced upon us, and then when it's forced upon us, it just feels kind of rough around the edges and terrible because we haven't actually played it or been given a reason to play it for potentially hundreds or even thousands of hours. It's staggering the number of veterans I've talked to, even people who just started playing the game a year ago who have, 500-600 hours, how little anyone actually engages in Archwing activities or even in the basic concept of unlocking new Archwing equipment. There's just not really an incentive to do so. That's obviously one of the big problems with it right from the get-go. But how did we get to that point? What have I seen as a newer player pushing up on the 200-hour mark now that has made me say, oh, I totally get it. I see a lot of these massive flaws that Archwing has, and what does the future hold? So let's talk a little bit about that today. Now, when I say I'm moving up on the 200-hour mark, that does mean that I personally right now am making my way through the War Within quest. In fact, this whole discussion spawned because of the War Within. I completed the game's first mission, and then the second or third mission or whatever it was asked me to do an Archwing mission yet again. So this is like the fourth or fifth time I've been required to deploy my Archwing for a game's story mission. I personally don't have that much of an issue with it now that my Archwing is a little bit more leveled. There was a point when I was doing Nata Second Dream where my Archwing was in a really rough state, like super low level. I had only done like low level Archwing stuff, and I hadn't grinded enough to actually obtain any mods, where I was just getting my arse kicked. I would eventually make it through many of those Archwing missions actually solo with a little bit of creativity and patience, which was actually kind of fun. It was nice to struggle a little bit, but nonetheless, I just always felt at the end of any Archwing mission that there was no real reward, right? There was nothing going on there for me to say I would go out in my free time and do more Archwing. Like, I already had begun understanding why people didn't care much for it, even if they liked the basic idea of it. So now that I was about to go into another Archwing mission in the War Within, I decided to actually take some time to look at the other Archwing equipment. The Archwings themselves, the primaries, the secondaries, and see what was actually available, and maybe craft some of that stuff and say, well, if I gotta do an Archwing mission anyway for War Within, why don't I maybe get a new Archwing weapon? Why don't we just start there? Why don't I get a new primary? So I went over to the market, started looking at the primaries and the arsenal, asking myself, which one do I like, before I even considered which one I would be able to obtain. I'd rather look at the ones that stand out to me and say, that sounds cool, and then worry about, the aftermath later. So I picked that massive 4-barrel cannon. The idea of just shredding people in space with a giant 4-barrel cannon is about as badass and as Gundam as I think it can get. Unfortunately, it was locked behind the dojo. Now that within itself isn't a huge deal, right? I went to the clan dojo, I'm in a smaller clan, but people are, it's a good group of people that I've known for a while now. And I said, yo, man, Armistice, man, I want to craft this cool thing, dude. And he's like, oh, Archwing weapons. And he's just like, I haven't even really ever looked at the Archwing weapons. And I was like, well, I'm going to put this one in research. I've got everything done, I just need some Oxium. I haven't actually checked it, but, maybe it's finished, maybe it's not. They probably all just think I'm crazy, like, why does Tony keep adding Archwing to the research projects in the dojo? What is he doing? But nonetheless, that was the case with that weapon. So again, not a huge deal like, oh, you got to go to the dojo. But I think in retrospect, and when we look at the other side of it, it actually is a big deal. You see, with the base Warframe experience, there are so many weapons, so many melee weapons, primaries, pistols, whatever it might be, right? That having a huge chunk of them behind the dojo isn't really a big deal. You still have the sort of standard quote-unquote progression system in Warframe and many weapons available behind that. Now, the standard progression system in Warframe is the idea of just being able to buy blueprints from the market. Warframe doesn't fit with a traditional looter shooter. You don't just acquire a weapon from killing a boss somewhere. You maybe get a blueprint for something from killing a boss somewhere. But your basic progression, the most common way that you unlock weapons in the game is to improve your MR, which then allows you to acquire certain blueprints that are available directly in the market. That is the base unlock and progression system. Anything beyond that is like the other stuff. The dojo, in my opinion, is considered the other stuff. So even though in some cases it might be just as easy to get a blueprint from the dojo, it's not on that main path for most players. And when it comes to Archwing stuff, right now, I can actually see a lot of players being unable to obtain any of these Archwing things, especially if they're low level and they don't have access to the resources that you need, like Oxium, for example. I need a lot of Oxium. I don't even have that much Oxium. There are people who maybe have more Oxium than I do, but they probably don't want to spend it on Archwing blueprints. So that's, right off the get-go, a huge issue with Archwing. There aren't many pieces of equipment, there aren't many Archwings, there aren't many weapons for the Archwings that are available just through the base market. Pretty much anything that looks cool ends up being behind the dojo. So there's really, right from the get-go, a barrier in terms of incentive to actually do any Archwing grinding, to actually be interested in acquiring resources outside of Archwing to unlock more Archwing stuff. So right from the get-go, I'm like, bam, okay, I can already see why this is an issue for so many people. Now, let's imagine for just a second that we were actually, you know, in a position where Archwing missions are abundant. They're all over the place, and hey, more of these Archwing, you know, blueprints are available directly from the market. What other issues would still exist for Archwing? And I think first and foremost, we run into the biggest one, which is just the sort of the core implementation of Archwing as a whole. It's a completely different system, right? The Archwings have their own abilities, and Archwing missions exist kind of in their own world. You know, you go out, you do Archwing missions, mods might drop for Archwings in those missions. You've got a variety of mission types, but very few of them actually blend Warframe gameplay and Archwing gameplay. And when they do, there's nothing really stellar or exciting about it. You know, the Grenier Sea Lab tile set's just like, hey, jump in the water with your Archwing and maybe shoot some stuff. Very rarely shoot some stuff. It just kind of feels like your Archwing got deployed because your Warframe didn't know how to swim. It's an unfortunate instance where we could have had Archwing in a completely different environment and engaged in, you know, combat and dealt with, like, you know, the underwater mines that we see every now and then, but there aren't really any missions on that tile set where you actually ever feel like you're utilizing your Archwing and actually engaging in combat back and forth across the Warframe and the Archwings themselves. And that's, honestly, I think one of the biggest missed opportunities that DE had was that right there. The idea of fusing Archwing with Warframe content more seamlessly. When I first started playing Archwing, I envisioned missions where I would be on foot, running my way through a derelict space station, you know, dealing with the infested, just spraying at them, and then suddenly, boom, we open this airlock and we're out in space, and it's like, all right, we got to get to the next piece of that ship, and maybe it's like kilometers away, right? So we get out in our Archwings, and now all of a sudden, you know, the enemy Grenier show up, or whatever, the Corpus show up, and their fighting is out in space, and we're navigating our way through, and maybe there's a mission objective we have to complete to breach the next hull in the other part of the derelict, and then we're back in our Warframe again, right? That perfect blending of the two, so you never feel like you're unable to access your Warframe's abilities. And when you do actually get in your Archwing, it kind of feels special. It doesn't just feel like this, you know, 45-minute grind of just killing a bunch of things while defending some beacons. That right there for me is the biggest, like, oh man, that would have been cool. It's too bad we don't really have much of that. Now, I'm of course talking about all of this from the perspective of someone who just really started dedicating time to Warframe. Archwing's kind of old at this point, right? I think everybody's kind of just had their way with it. I think even DE, you know, has kind of just accepted the fact that community doesn't really like it that much. You know, let's move on to bigger and better things. Let's find new ways to keep players interested. Let's introduce new content that keeps veteran players playing and stops people from walking away. So I understand why they probably reached a point where they just said, that's it. You know, what's the point in putting more work, more time into Archwing? People have really already decided they don't like it. Maybe we can come back to this at a later date. And you know, we see the Archwing implementation in Plains of Eidolon. It's like there, and maybe one day it will all turn into something. The one thing that keeps me hopeful, because I really do like Archwing, I just wish it could be executed better. I wish they could go back and do a refresh for it. I love the idea of this sort of sci-fi space shooter part of Warframe. I really do. And when we see it implemented still in some of these cinematic quests, like as just a one-off, it makes me feel like DE still like wants to hold on to the idea of Archwing. You know, they want to revive it at some point. So if that ends up being something that happens a year, 2 years, 3 years from now, you know, I look forward to maybe the return or the first golden age of Archwing, if you will. And I want to know from you guys personally, from you vets, from you newer players like myself, What would be important to making that golden age happen with Archwing? What systems would you need to see put in place for Archwing to make it better than it is now, to make it worth playing, to make it exciting, to make it an integrated and valuable addition to the current Warframe experience? I've already talked really about mine. I think it's important for them to revamp the progression system. I want to see maybe Archwing story missions, cinematic Archwing quest that again fuse Warframe and Archwing gameplay, and that give us the opportunity to progress the Archwings themselves a little bit more and to actually acquire new Archwing equipment without it just being something that we kind of passively craft in the dojo or even in our foundry. Please share all of your thoughts down in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.